And welcome to another episode of Ardent Cinema, the number one podcast for a book club style discussion of all things movies. This is a weekly podcast, and we encourage you to follow along as we take a deep dive into each movie's plot, overall themes, what we thought of the acting and directing, our feelings on the film, and more. At the end of each episode, we will announce the movie for next week, so make sure to listen until the end. I am your daytime host, Sean.
I'm your nocturnal host, Daniel.
Welcome to the show. Soy Alejandro de España, no hablo español. This week, we hope you watch along with us for Nocturnal Animals 2016.
Do you ever feel like your life has turned into something you never intended?
Edward? Hi.
Susan. Hi.
Good to see you.
You look beautiful, as always.
I never sleep. My ex-husband used to call me a nocturnal animal.
Do you know that you were my first crush?
You were my first crush, too. I've been thinking about him a lot lately. And then recently, he sent me this book that he's written.
Did you love him?
I did something horrible to him. I left him in a brutal way.
He's too weak for you. The things you love about him now are the things you'll hate.
What are we gonna do?
It's a question of how serious you are about seeing justice done.
I really wanted to be this person that you thought I was.
You're making a big mistake.
He'll never find out.
When you love someone, you have to be careful with it. You might never get it again.
Nobody gets away with what you did. Nobody.
Available on Netflix, Amazon, and Blu-ray. Based on the novel called, guys?
Tony and Susan.
Correct. By Austin Wright.
Wait, I'm sorry. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Tony and Susan. That's the name of the book.
That's right. Do a little research, Sean. Jesus Christ.
No, I leave the research to Alejandro.
We're
To the
professionals.
professionals, exactly.
Written and directed by Tom Ford. You may know him from his breathtaking work on A Single Man, starring Amy Adams as Susan Morrow, Jake Gyllenhaal as Tony Hastings / Edwards Sheffield, Michael Shannon as Lieutenant Bobby Andes, and Aaron Taylor Johnson as Ray, the big baddie. Steeped in regret and melancholy, successful gallery owner Susan Morrow receives a novel written by her estranged ex-husband. Haunted by the story, the facade of her life begins to crumble around her as she reevaluates the choices she's made. Impressions?
I'll start.
After he points at me.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I thought this movie was pretty good.
High praise.
Big bummer of a movie, I'll be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
It's well made, well acted, very well shot. I really do hope we can get into the cinematography here because I have some thoughts about it and very positive thoughts about it.
Fantastic.
I have some misgivings about the way the plot was structured, and I think the focus was a bit too much on Tony / Edward's story and less so on Susan, which I think was the focal point, at least early on. But beyond that, I thought it's a solid, well-made movie. What about you, Dana?
So, other than the very first scene of the movie, which completely threw me off.
Yeah. I thought I clicked the wrong movie. I legitimately thought
me
that.
too. So it starts off with some extremely heavy women doing kind of like a dance number.
Yeah, these obese older ladies dancing with batons and laying down in seductive poses.
Yeah, in close-ups and slow-mo, and you're just wondering what is going on. It was the strangest way to start a film. So yeah, that threw me off. Didn't care to see that, but I understood that it was to kind of show a little bit of Susan's work. Her being an art gallery manager or
I think she just owns
she owns the gallery,
and I guess throwing her own show there too.
So she throws events.
Yeah.
So that was her show, and thematically it kind of correlates a little bit to modern art versus the script, the book that she receives from her husband, which we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. But overall, I liked the movie. It was great. Fantastic acting. It was a downer for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It was very suspenseful. They did a great job with the suspense in this film. Had me at the edge of my seat. Great movie.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of this film. If all it had going for it was gorgeous set design, cinematography, and wardrobe, I would have walked away satisfied. For me, it just also happened to have brilliant performances, smart writing, and a crushing web of a story to go with it.
Absolutely.
So as you had mentioned, the movie starts with Susan kind of disillusioned with her world. We see her show that she put on, like you described, and she kind of sees it for what it is, titillation for the rich and powerful. Not much substance to it.
Yeah, it's very pretentious.
Very pretentious, low meaning, pretty low brow, but it's like, how do you put it? Obviously interesting. Like, ooh, instead of beautiful women dancing, it's ugly women dancing.
Yeah,
this
like
means something special. Yeah.
It's eye-catching, but for all the wrong reasons. It's made to just get a reaction out of people.
Yeah,
basically.
Reactionary, easy to look at it and think there's something deep in there. So
it's very surface level.
Very surface level. She sees through it, and despite the show being a big success, she is currently very melancholy and disillusioned. Yeah. So that's her start.
You know, the strange thing is I don't really care about all this art.
Let's talk about your opening. My favorite subject.
Not mine.
I thought the work was incredibly strong. So perfect with all this junk culture that we live in.
Junk it is. Junk. Total junk.
Definitely. Which, yeah, I think parallels that exhibit kind of parallels her life right now, her life trajectory. It just feels kind of meaningless and kind of starts causing her to look back at her previous marriage, which was with Jake Gyllenhaal's character.
Yeah.
Which was kind of the other side of art, which is the true to heart kind of art.
Yeah, as he says later on, he writes about himself.
Yeah.
So it's very different.
Well, so I'm curious about that. It's an interesting point you bring up, because even at that point, when we see those scenes with Susan and her ex-husband, Edward, she's always doubting herself. Like she always brings up that what she's doing, like her art is not meaningful or it's not very good. Like she's just very down on herself, just completely.
Why'd you give up on becoming an artist?
Because I'm too cynical to be an artist. I think that to be really, really good, you have to come from someplace inside that I'm just not sure I have.
Do you know what it feels like to put yourself out on the line creatively and then have someone you love tell you that they don't understand it?
No, I don't, because I'm not creative.
That's because you choose not to be.
And, Edward's there trying to comfort her and console her and try to, encourage her to move forward with her art. But there's a bit of a conflict between this budding artist or this budding artistry in her versus the way that she was raised and the way that her parents, or specifically her mother, has raised her to be. The mother compares
to like one of the elites, basically. Like a lot of wealth and the finest things. And she feels like she can't get that if she's just doing her true art. She feels like that's gonna fail.
Yeah, she doesn't have faith.
Yeah, there's a conflict between what she feels about her art versus what she's been told about it and what she's been told by her mother specifically about how she should comport herself, how she should live her life. The fact that she's most likely going to become her mother, which in essence she kind of did for some time. And this is her realization almost and her like disillusionment with life in general because of it. So do you think the impetus for this reflection was due to the novel, or do you think that was something that she was feeling for some time? The reason I asked that is because there's a scene where she's in a boardroom meeting, and a week prior to getting the novel, an employee was going to be fired, and she brought up like, hey, maybe we should change this person out. And then she changed her view on that in the board meeting. But I wonder if that was just a reflection of like her need to act a certain way in business in the time versus like how she truly felt, or if it was more like the impetus of this novel and the realization of what's going on here with Edward and his mindset brought that upon her.
She clearly already felt it. We see that in her loveless marriage. We see that in her dissatisfaction with her social life. She's talking to her friend and telling her that she's unhappy, essentially. She's not sleeping. So I see this as something that's been building for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say the manuscript more so kickstarted her into action.
Yeah, that's something we see in the story. almost immediately after she had made her decision to leave Edward behind and kill his child, she
Wow.
I don't know the way to put it. She immediately regrets it and says she's going to come, or she knows she's going to come to regret it. So there's a part of her that has always been a romantic and always will be, that although she was afraid and set that aside, never really left her. So this is probably something that's been building up in her mind for years.
Absolutely.
Maybe decades.
Do you think she would have come to the same point if he hadn't sent her the novel? Or do you think it would have been more slow growing over years and years and years and, would have been eating away at her even more?
I think it would have been like her mother. Eventually you come to a certain acceptance and you see that as yourself and you let that part of you die.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't, I think we only spent like one scene with the mother, but we hear about her a lot. And she's
ever present in her mind.
She's ever present in her mind. She does not want to be compared to her mother at all. And yeah, it really seems like the mother is like a pathway that Susan can choose. And in essence has chosen for some time. But, she, again, like that inner conflict within her wants to fight against that. Or at least some part of her wants to fight against that. But I like that the film doesn't necessarily show that that's an easy choice or even a successful choice.
Yeah. I actually thought her mother was a pretty tragic figure because Edward, being the observant writer, immediately sees the similarities between them. And I think Susan sees it as he sees the bad part in both of them, but I think it's both. He sees the good and the bad. So her mother was probably a romantic as well, but maybe never had an Edward in her life to show her that path. He describes her mother as having sad eyes, and you have the same sad eyes, Susan. So I see that as a little bit tragic. It's never really expanded upon, but I think it's something that's present.
I've always loved your mom.
Really?
Yeah. She was great with me when my dad died. You both have the same kind of sadness in your eyes.
Just don't sound like my mom, okay? I don't want to be like her.
You may not realize it, but you and I are a lot more alike than you think.
You're wrong. You and I are nothing alike.
I understand what you see in Edward. I get it. No, wait, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
You don't.
He's a romantic.
Yeah, you kind of do get that inkling, like that the mother was very similar to Susan, even at a younger age. Like, I think the mother even said it to her at one point. She didn't allude like, "Oh yeah, I was once a starry-eyed girl," but you can kind of sense it.
She does say, "I know what you see in Edward," and correctly describes those things. So she must have had a similar mindset.
Right.
They're attracted to the same things.
When Edward describes Susan's mother consoling him when one of his parents passed away,
his father,
right, when his father passed away, do you think that was genuine on her part? Do you think that was something that was maybe a little more calculated in some way?
Yeah. I think it was genuine. I think that's just a part of herself that she doesn't want to accept or indulge. But I think she is deep down sweet when the opportunity presents itself.
It's interesting then because we're talking about like what you see, right? And a lot of the film is cutting back and forth between Susan and Tony, the fake character in Edward's novel.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of back and forth shots like that. And
so clearly it's asking you to make parallels.
Right. And like the way that you see Susan and her mother, it's almost like they're sitting in the same position, just kind of parallel to one another, which right. I don't always see in films, but I do appreciate. They didn't go the extra mile and like, showcasing them, flipping back and forth. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of like parallelism, both in the dialogue, but also like in the cinematography as well, that I think really shone forth in this film that I really appreciated.
Definitely. A little bit of symbolism we get when Susan is opening Edward's novel. She cuts herself and she gets a little paper cut. And I think this is to show that attack may be a strong word, but this is not going to be something pleasant. This is going to hurt you.
Oh, I didn't even thought about that.
That's a good observation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story clearly shows us that this novel is kind of a fuck you to Susan.
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, it's definitely.
Yeah. So that kind of fits in with it.
Yeah, it also felt like a wake-up call kind of thing too. The paper cut. It felt like that was like, oh, here comes a turning point.
Right. A little like startle her awake.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see that.
Can we talk a little bit about the novel and like what it actually is and what it means a bit?
Yeah.
But so keep in mind that the book is named after her and dedicated to her.
Yes.
So this is very clearly something specific, maybe not to her, but it's about her and her effect on his life.
Yeah, it's influenced by her for sure. So basically the story is about a man and his wife and daughter who go on a trip. They go on a kind of road trip. And during this road trip, they run into
Ray and the gang.
Ray and the gang.
A gang of hooligans.
Yeah.
Gang of hooligans. They're drunk, driving, basically.
Up to no
good. So they see Ray and the gang. They're drunk driving. They're kind of driving a little slowly, actually. So Edward tries to get in front of them. They start making kind of a ruckus. And then the daughter flips the bird.
Well, let me stop you right there, because that's almost playing to their narrative that they did this because you flipped me off, because you accused me of blah, blah, blah. They were intentionally trying to trap somebody.
Oh, of course.
This was a trap.
Right.
They didn't do anything to deserve this or even to provocate it. They would have always found an excuse to hurt these people.
I'm just kind of saying what you're seeing as you're reading it, right? But yeah, it definitely was intentional. You learn that they've done this kind of thing before. Basically, they run Edward and his family off the road, forcing. He gets a flat tire, and their plan was essentially to rape and kill the wife and daughter, and they were gonna, kill Edward, but it didn't happen. They didn't kill Edward because the guy decided instead to drop him off in the middle of the desert. Which ends up being a mistake for them.
Right.
Because he comes back for legal revenge.
And the couch that they find the wife and daughter dumped on is a bright red couch that parallels the couch that Susan is laying on when she tears Edward's book apart and tells him he should do something else with his life.
Right.
So this is where you killed me.
Yep.
Or this is where you killed us.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it's more us than him because I mean you could think of it as kill him too, because Tony in the novel is never the same again. Like he's just engrossed with, finding justice for what was done.
Since you mentioned that he had a sort of death, I think Bobby, the character, Lieutenant Bobby, the officer, is symbolic of Edward after the fact. He's determined, hardworking, strong, and stoic. Susan mentioned that Edward never remarried, and the book Bobby also has no one. He has a daughter that he doesn't have contact with, and said another way, a daughter he lost. The words he actually used were, I have a daughter in corpus meaning dead body by another definition. So I felt like Bobby was symbolic of the person he became after Susan hurt him.
Right. And he says that also because he had lost a child because Susan aborted the child.
Right.
Basically. So that kind of represents why Bobby is saying that he has a dead daughter.
Which, not to get too off track, but how did Edward know that she was getting an abortion there? Because he's there, he finds out. Like he's in the rain, staring at her as she's coming out the abortion clinic.
I don't think it matters. Better that they don't give us an answer.
Yeah, it did throw me off for a moment when you saw that he's just standing there in front of the car as Susan's getting consoled by Armie Hammer.
Yeah, her new husband, her soon-to-be husband. Yeah, I think the important thing is what is the worst possible thing that could have happened, and that was it.
That was it.
Him seeing his wife in the arms of another man after she just aborted his kid.
Were they married at the time?
Yeah, they were still married.
You know that for certain?
Yeah, for certain. She mentions him several times that he's her ex-husband.
Well, no. I mean, at that moment at the abortion clinic, were they married?
Yeah.
Well,
they had been married already for a while.
They were divorced at that point.
No, that's what I'm asking. Were they divorced?
Oh, no. She had just broken up with him maybe the day before. I mean, they don't say how much time, but I got the feeling that had just happened.
Really? That was like a day or two after, you think?
Yeah. Because she had already been flirting with this other guy in her classes. If they hadn't cheated already, then she was planning on it. So she was kind of hedging her bets there.
Didn't she meet him after she had already broke things off with Edward?
No. They don't say specifically, but you see before they had broken up that she's looking at this guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's like taking notes, and then I don't know, she looks back for some reason.
Yeah,
and
so they had met
there.
before.
Yeah, they like lock eyes.
Right.
So he was the transitional guy.
I didn't have faith in him. I panicked and I did something horrible to him, something unforgivable.
You left him?
I left him in a brutal way.
Another cool movie detail, the character Ray is tapping on Tony's car, and the camera zooms in for a close-up, and you see him with a bunch of women's rings, mementos of past victims. What do you think?
Maybe he's just a weirdo.
Or he's a weirdo, but...
I mean, he is a weirdo. I mean, he installed like a toilet.
It makes a point of
outside
showing
his
us
show.
that. And we know he has more victims.
I mean, they equally showed him, having like manicured nails, and they were like all colored too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, I guess you could read it either way.
For sure.
Going back to Bobby, it's very interesting. To me, he definitely seemed like a vector of who Edward is now, in some sense, which is strange to think about, because then that means he's also dying. It's like,
yeah, what does that mean?
Is Edward dying because of the heartbreak that happened as a result of Susan's actions? Was it he's actually just dying himself for some other unimportant reason? When you mention like that's him, or that's a version of him now, it's like he's strong-willed and stoic, but beyond that he's frail. Like Bobby is shown after he initially meets with Tony, like the rest of the film, he's shown to be a bit frail and, kind of underweight a bit. He's losing a lot of weight. He can barely eat. And then towards the end, he's like pretty frail looking.
It could be that it's a side of him that he's still trying to figure out. Like he's still fighting with his old self.
Maybe the part of himself that he's leaving behind now that he finished the book.
Could be.
I think of it more like literal. Like he's
got cancer.
Yeah, or he's dying. Like he's not gonna be around for much longer.
Could be.
And it's interesting because their dynamic, I really appreciated their dynamic actually, Tony and Bobby's. It speaks to Edward's persona, because at times when you would think rationally he would be so focused on his family and getting justice for them. I'm thinking in the diner scene in particular. He takes time out of the conversation about committing extrajudicial justice on Ray and his cohorts to ask like how Bobby's doing, which I thought was strange at first. But then as I thought about it, I thought, okay, this speaks to Edward and who he actually is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you should write about something other than yourself.
Nobody writes about anything but themselves.
Because he's the very kind and compassionate person, always wants to make sure that you're okay, always comforting, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was taken a bit to the extreme in this film, or like in the novelization rather. But I think it does show like a clear parallel of like who this person is and who he was and who he is now.
Yeah, to me that diner scene shows a little bit of a clash in his.
Yeah, I think you're right.
In his psyche, basically.
Yeah,
he's trying to fight.
Tony is the weak-willed person he wished he wasn't when he knew Susan.
Right.
Bobby is who he's become, and there's the clash.
Right.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that.
Yeah.
But it's like once you become that, then that's death, basically.
Right.
Basically, what he's telling us, it's like, okay, I became this.
It could represent death of a certain part of him,
Sure.
or of his art side, like because he's no longer this sensitive person, which I think sometimes comes with being an artist.
Mm-hmm.
So it could mean that. There's a lot of interpretations here that you can go through.
But it's strange because like he seemingly goes through this transformation, or it's insinuated that he goes through this transformation, but then ultimately he still sticks with what he knows, which is writing about himself. It's not like he took Susan's advice and decided to write about something else or do something else.
Oh, I don't think that was ever an option. It was do something else. But he made the point that
she mentioned
it, but he never accepts that at any point, and I don't think he ever would. His interpretation was that all writers write about themselves, and that it's not something you can help. It's what you do as a writer. So I don't think that was ever up for grabs in terms of something that was going to change.
I guess, yeah.
What did change was the style of his writing and how
for sure,
visceral and how
poignant.
What's the word? Suspenseful. How suspenseful it was. You know, that definitely was not his strong suit. It seemed before, because
we never see his writings, but she's not very impressed.
Yeah, she's like bored reading it.
Not only is she not impressed, but she specifically mentions that she was thinking of other things while reading it, which is the exact opposite reaction that she has when she's reading Nocturnal Animals,
right?
Where that's all she can think about. Yeah. I mean, it's even, you know, penetrating like her day-to-day life, where, you know, she's seeing video cam of a coworker's baby, and then all of a sudden you see Ray jump scare, which is weird, but you know, it worked.
Yeah.
So there's certain elements that have, like, you know, infiltrated her mind and like are just so established there now in her.
And going back to parallels for a moment between the manuscript and real life, what did you guys think of the cut from the body of the daughter and mother to Susan's daughter in real life?
I couldn't find any real deep meaning in that. Here's the daughter you killed. There's your daughter. That's all it's saying, as far as I could read into it.
I mean, she also had like a red draping or red blanket on the bed too that wasn't quite the same color. It was a little more muted just because of the style of color in the Susan scenes. But yeah, it was very similar.
But the parallel is 100%. Like they're bleeding. There's the red drapes. It's
right.
And Susan's having this kind of existential dread, this instinct. She calls her daughter afraid for her life. Like, I want to make sure you're okay.
Yeah, it felt also like it was just to...
So the parallel was created in her mind, for sure.
The parallel, it was created in her mind, and I felt also like it was almost to like show so that Susan can gain more empathy for what she had done, aborting the baby.
And I think she does after that. After reading
definitely. That. Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if Susan didn't have a great relationship with her daughter.
I got that feeling too, that question. Like maybe her relationship with her daughter is now similar to hers with her mother.
Yeah, or it's just like near cut off at this point. You know, maybe they check in once in a while with each other, but other than that, like there's no real congeniality between them.
Yeah, I didn't feel any hostility at least.
No, definitely not. Not. So it's not to the extent that, you know, Tony's family dying and that's completely cut off. Like there's still a little bit of life there. So I kind of read that as more like, hey, treasure this for what it is, right? There's still some life in this relationship. Like, don't let it go.
Yeah, maybe it's a little cold at the moment.
Right.
So what did you guys think about the fact that while Susan was reading this manuscript, she was manifesting Tony's appearance to look like her ex, Edward?
I imagined either he explained their relationship to have a similar dynamic, so she auto-filled that, or simply he described his character to look like him.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that actually is because I read that unlike the film, in the novel, Susan actually doesn't do that. So I wanted to see kind of like, do you think that has a better impact on the film, on the message of the story versus not?
The movie's already hard enough to understand. I like that they look exactly the same, so you can quickly make that parallel.
Yeah,
that's where I fall on that.
What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I think it's just as simple as she's basing it off what she knows. This is by her ex. She knows what her ex looks like. And it's a family man. And, you know, he's kind of wanted to always be a family man. At least I understood. So she's just kind of filling the blanks there, basically.
But if she didn't fill out the blanks, would you think it's better that it is Jake Gyllenhaal in both characters? Or would it be better if it was another actor?
I mean, subtext is for cowards. So I guess I'm glad. I guess I'm glad it was the same actor, because then I'd be like, okay, yes, we're supposed to understand that this is him, but we'd have to do like one extra level of
big jump,
thinking in order to build that connection and, you know, rebuild that connection every time they split away from Tony and go back to Susan.
Well, you can also make an argument for the fact that maybe it's also a little hand-holdy by making it the same actor.
I agree with you. I'm just talking, I'm thinking from a business perspective. I'm sure there's already so many people walking away being like, I don't know what the hell I just watched.
Right.
That's fair.
That it's kind of a middle ground you got to do.
True. Yeah, it makes sense. I could see why they decided to alter that from the original book.
Right. I agree with you. I think if they had used another actor, we still would have found our way there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And plus, like, just practically speaking, Jake Gyllenhaal is a phenomenal actor. So it's
Love
like,
to see him. Yeah.
you know, I'll happily watch him in this film twice, you know, doing 2 different roles. So.
Oh my God. Yeah. He'd be so wasted if we just had him flashback Edward. Yeah.
That's true.
As like nice little boy Edward.
Yeah, right. Which, like, what a great job he did, by the way. Like, just showing the different levels of his psyche, basically, in these 2 different roles.
Oh
yeah, that was like just a masterful job.
His pain was really visceral.
Absolutely, the look of shock that he's able to put on is incredible.
There's some other manifestations that come about in the novel. Like, for example, right around the time that Susan breaks things off with Edward, she walks away. They're in the streets arguing, and she walks away, and then he walks up to some kind of dealership, and there's a car in a window, and it's the same car that Ray was driving in the novel.
You're right.
With some red lighting there, by the way. There was one other big one. Like, did you guys see any other manifestations from the flashback scenes or like from the real life that were made whole in the novel?
The couch was the big one I caught. I missed the car. There was an interesting parallel. She has a painting, a photograph on her wall that looks like one of the final scenes in his novel, which was just a cool connection. But no, I didn't catch anything else. I'm sure they're there.
Oh, do you mean the painting, the 2, like the one person holding someone else at gunpoint?
Yeah, like a little a standoff, a western shot.
Right.
It's the shot starts off with the camera zoomed in on it, and for a second I thought we were back in his novel, and then it pulls out. And that was pretty cool. I like that.
That was cool.
Did you notice anything else like that, Danny?
No, those were all the connections I made as well. Actually, yeah, I can't think of any other ones right now.
I mean, I guess the fact that his family was redheaded.
Oh yeah, that's a clear indication of who he's talking about.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
For sure. Do you feel like Ray was also a manifestation of Susan?
I think he was a manifestation of what he needed to overcome.
Oh, do you think like Ray embodies some of the characteristics that Edward saw in Susan, maybe? Like, for example, he's a bit flighty. He's a bit kind of, I want to say unstable. That's maybe too strong of a word, but.
I mean, but from a hurt person's perspective, it might be what he's going for.
Right.
Sure. Right. But I guess what I'm saying is like, we don't see her being unstable, at least completely, and we don't see her being flighty, but maybe those are like characteristics that he saw in her that are embodied in Ray. So like maybe it's more so like the certain elements of Susan that Edward didn't like, that he felt that were bringing her down and bringing her closer to what her mother is.
Yeah, you kind of see that when Ray and Tony are in the last scene, I believe, where he's telling Tony, "Yo, you're weak."
I remember your fucking wife. I remember fucking your wife. You're too weak. Too fucking weak, you know? You're too weak to do anything about it.
You're weak, you know, which is basically, it kind of parallels to the conversation that Susan has with Edward, where she doesn't really say you're weak, but she's kind of implying it a little bit, and Tony calls her out on it. Or Edward. Edward calls her out on it. He's like, "Oh no, you didn't actually say it, but I can tell that you think I'm weak. I can tell by how you're, by
the way you're standing,
the way you're looking at me, all this stuff."
So Tony, the manifestation of Edward's weakness, needs to overcome Ray.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's really good.
This is a side note, but I just wanted to add that I just really liked Bobby as a character overall, because I was just really rooting for this guy. Like,
hell yeah,
yes, this is the type of cop that I want. If my wife gets murdered,
definitely, that's the cop you want on your side.
He was pretty amazing, and that actor is so good. What's his name?
Michael Shannon.
Yeah, he's fantastic and everything.
Yeah, he's so good.
Yeah, he tells Tony, essentially, we're not going to get him on the books. We got to take this outside the law. Are you down?
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Can you handle it?
Again, he is like he's the pragmatic side of Edward, of what he seemingly is now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he sees things for what it is. He's not trying to be a romantic. He's not trying to chase any ideal. It's just, I know what needs to be done and I'm going to do it.
He's not even sad about his dispossessed daughter. He's just kind of matter-of-factly, that's what it is.
Yeah, no, he's moved past any kind of trauma that he's had.
Very stoic for sure.
Right. So yeah, that guy, you know, at first when I was watching the movie, I thought like, okay, he's cool and he's very stoic. He's very machismo in a way, but I didn't think much of him. But as their relationship developed, him and Tony's, I thought, okay, he's like the one constant in Tony's life here. Because like about a year passes, give or take, from the incident to when they catch Ray and the other guys.
Yeah, from when they start catching them, for sure.
Right.
When Tony first runs into Bobby, what did you feel about Bobby's like reaction to Tony? Didn't it feel a little bit like
disgusted?
He
almost.
was a little disgusted at him, which at first you think, damn, I mean, do you just maybe not believe this guy? Do you think...
Well, he thinks he's weak.
Exactly. Right. At first you don't think that, but then once you start realizing the parallels of what these characters represent, then you start seeing that it makes sense that it's like the other part of Tony recognizing the old,
or chastising the old
the old him, basically. Like, how could I have ever been that?
Oh, these guys who took your wife and daughter, they didn't have guns?
Yeah, he's questioning him. It's like, was there something there that caused you to not act?
Right.
Basically.
When they called out for you to go to your wife, why didn't you go?
Yeah.
He's being unreasonable, but you can see why.
Exactly.
Tell you what, we take you back to the house we picked you up at. You think you could backtrack from there?
I could try.
Okay then, you try. Let's go. It's my understanding these fellas didn't have any guns.
No.
All right. So let me get this straight. You say some fellow named Lou just drove you out into the brush and left you there?
No, he made me drive.
He made you drive. Whose car were they in?
I think it was mine.
You think? Did they say anything?
They said, "Mister, your wife wants you."
And you didn't go to him. Why didn't you go to him?
I don't know why I didn't go.
Yeah, I wonder if that was his way of saying, like, I really had to fight with myself and fight with my person in order to come out this new version of myself. And now it's just a full indictment of who I used to be. It's very cynical in a way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of cynicism that runs through the movie.
Yeah, sometimes you do got to be harsh with yourself, even to an unreasonable amount, if you want to make a certain change.
If you want to grow.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So I wonder if that then plays into like Edward's ultimate plan about what the point was of sending Susan the novel to begin with. I mean, we can get into that now.
Yeah. The point is, like I mentioned at the beginning, and I still hold to this, it's a fuck you. You didn't believe in me. I made it. Here's my novel. I'm better than I ever have been. On top of that, we'll see why, but he's over her. Yeah. And he shows this to her in a very specific way.
He's not weak anymore.
And I think even on top of that, you're going to read this, you're going to fall in love with me all over again, and you're going to realize what you lost.
Oof. And then let's throw a little layer on top of that with Sean's theory. He's actually already dead. And his secretary sent the novel and wrote the emails.
It was in his will. Sent this to
one email, just a reply back.
Exactly, a reply. And then obviously he didn't make it to the dinner because he's dead.
Right.
Well, I wonder, because like I don't know that I would have agreed with your understanding of his intentions as laid out. But then the moment he replies to the email and gets her to like take an action, that's where I thought, okay, this is a bit more insidious on his part, because I can certainly read it as like, hey, you hurt me, this is how you hurt me, and I want you to understand it,
and that is there,
and maybe grow from it in some way, like have an understanding of yourself so you can move past it. But then when he starts leading her on with the email reply, and then the assumption is, then you assume like they had a little bit of back and forth so they can pick the time and place, this and that. That's where I thought, okay, this really is like a screw you then on his part. Like maybe there's some part of him that wants her to grow at least and move beyond it, but it's very clear, because he left her there and the way that they film her reaction and like time passing, and she's just drinking and drinking more and more. He has no intention of laying this person off lightly.
No. I think the silver lining we can come away with, if you do need some kind of catharsis.
Oh, I do.
Is that, yeah, Susan definitely cemented the change she was going through from the beginning. We see her change her look. She carries herself differently. I don't think she's going to go back to her old life.
Yeah.
She's not going to stay with her cheating husband and her unfulfilling art. So that's the silver lining. I was actually initially disappointed and unsatisfied. I think most people are watching this movie, at least initially, because you are kind of expecting this to be a love story. At least I was. I almost had the feeling the first time I watched it that they're going to get back together. They're going to forgive their past mistakes, and they're both going to live happily ever after. She's going to leave her cheating husband. It's going to be all okay.
Well, I definitely loved the way it ended. I
loved it too.
I wasn't disappointed.
Good.
When he didn't show up, I was really happy because I felt like that would have been a loss for him in a way.
Yeah.
It would have been a moment of weakness, and he kind of had to show that. And I like also that not only is it like a fuck you to Susan, but it's also I still love you and I want you to learn and be better kind of moment. I think that's also the reason why he wrote it.
The person who Edward is, I see that being in there. I don't think he's fully transformed into I'm going to just play with her.
Exactly.
The optimist in me wants to see that, hey, you know, in part he did this because he wants her to grow and move past her insecurities and the like.
Right.
But on the other hand, it just doesn't sit well with me to seek out revenge, as justified as it may be, on his part, to seek revenge on her in a way. I'd rather at this point just let her long for him and just be
You're saying the part that of him like responding to the emails.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole thing about her leading her on to get her to come to the restaurant. I think that to me is a bit of a step too far. Again, despite how justified it may be because of her actions, that I think is like, I don't know. I don't know that's.
Well, that's never explicitly said. So you could say in your mind that he had full intentions of showing up and at the last minute.
So he was dead.
That's not what I'm saying. Full intentions of showing up, and then at the last minute realized it wasn't the right choice for him.
Or it was to stamp, or it was to stamp the point that, you know, that this is a learning lesson. You know, like she won't learn if he comes back necessarily. You know, you need to stand your ground.
But it's like all the lessons that are learned in the film. You know, like Tony, for example, you know, he learns to stand up for himself and more so like stand by his intentions and his ideals. But then he ends up shooting himself and he dies.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is more so for the fact that, you know, that version of Edward dies.
Definitely.
Than repudiation of any kind of lesson learning. But at the same time, it's like seemingly anytime a character learns a lesson, there's consequences for learning that lesson. Where I think in some ways, and maybe this is just like, you know, the director trying to understand like the meaning of change and the meaning of like growth, is that despite you wanting to grow and change doesn't mean things are going to change on a dime, that things are going to become better for you. There's a lot of hard work that comes into it and you may not even succeed.
And also you're looking at death as in its literal interpretation, whereas in the novel you could easily say, like you mentioned, that it could be the death of a persona that you're trying to drop.
Right.
But I do agree that also was very heartbreaking and unsatisfying when it happens, because half the movie, maybe more, is following Tony, not Edward and Susan.
Right.
So when he finally gets his revenge and then falls on his gun and shoots himself, that's pretty heartbreaking.
It is.
Truthfully, I'd rather he would have just died having been attacked by Ray. Like he kills Ray, but then Ray kills him. So at the very least, like he's conquered it.
I think it works better him shooting himself. I feel like, in a way, both Bobby and Edward, who were these conflicting characteristics of one person, were both essentially going to die. One with the cancer, the other one shooting himself with a gun. I felt like that kind of symbolized almost an evolution. You know?
I think it worked literally. Literarily, it worked.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I felt like that it kind of it signified that kind of change and evolution.
Part of the reason that it's so heartbreaking might be so that you then go looking for those answers. If it was a satisfying ending where his character gets his revenge and then real life Edward gets back together with Susan, would you have gone back and try and reinterpret everything? Maybe not.
Feels too safe of an ending for sure.
Right. It would have been a disservice to the character for sure in either circumstance.
Right. Yeah, I guess for me it's just the final scene of her at the restaurant that
I see what you mean.
I don't think
it ends
it was
on a negative, right?
It's not only that
like
it's on a
revenge.
negative, but it's like a petty negative.
I see what you're saying.
Like I think the film could have been as stronger, more stronger if like that scene didn't happen and maybe she didn't try to reach out and it was more like her longing and knowing that she could never get that back. You know, because you would have arrived pretty much at the same conclusion, just without like pettiness, basically.
Storytelling wise, I see what you're saying. It's not a very cathartic ending for the conclusion to be pettiness, but for me, it works on the individual basis. Like that's what he needed. He needed to get that win and move on with his life and tell her, even though you put me through all this hell, I'm going to be okay.
And ultimately, she needed that as well. I think that's important to know.
Again, it was rough on her.
It looks negative.
It does.
But if you think about it, it's not. It's the turning point that she needed. Like, they didn't show at the end her just like, nodding her head. Yeah, that's what I need. Because they don't want to make it obvious. But that kind of cemented her change into the person that she needs to become, ultimately. So I think if we look at future Susan after this movie, I feel like we could safely say that she turns her life around for the better. After this one moment, her life starts going up. She needed this crash to make her wake up and understand.
She has every opportunity to turn her life around.
Yeah.
Are we ready for reviews?
Scores?
Yes, sir.
Scores.
Final
I believe it's Danny's turn to start.
I think so.
All right. Go ahead.
All right. So I am giving this film a 9.5.
Oh, baby.
Out of 10. I mean,
I thought the work was incredibly strong.
I was not expecting that.
Just incredible writing. The writing
Yeah,
is so good.
Definitely.
And not to knock down all the other elements because they're all fantastic, the acting and the cinematography, but the writing really is where it shines here, and how the writer was able to just like draw these parallels, and to me the conclusion was fantastic.
I think this really meshed well with Mulholland Drive in terms of trying to make those connections and do this interpretive world. So I thought it was a good parallel.
Absolutely. But I think it was done better, in my opinion.
Damn. All right.
Yeah. I think it was done more uniformly.
Sure.
And more cleverly, in my opinion. Although Mulholland does give you a little bit more of that thought candy, right? Because it leaves more to interpret.
Oh, yeah. I'm still not convinced I have the full definition of what happened.
Same. But this one does give you a little bit more to go on. I do feel like it's a little easier to follow, but you still got to really pay attention.
Definitely.
How about you, Shauna boy?
Man, if that's not an advertisement to listen to our Mulholland Drive episode from the previous week, I don't know what is. So tune in.
Or else.
I wasn't as bullish on this film as you guys were. I give it a 7.5 out of 10.
It's junk, it is. Junk. Total junk.
What a bummer of a movie.
I ain't gonna kill you, son. I'm a policeman.
It's well made, well acted, mostly, well shot. We didn't really talk about the cinematography beyond like some parallelism that happened in it, but this film was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and I think that helped bump up my score a bit. I love that the fact that like all of Susan's scenes are very drab and very muted colors versus, for the most part, versus Tony's scenes are very bright, colorful scenes as well. I really appreciate it. So
definitely.
But beyond that, I get the sense that a lot of the film was a bit more where we're supposed to like feel what's going on rather than maybe interpret a lot of what's happening. I think especially towards the end, kind of like Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, I was about to say that it's very similar to what you said about Mulholland Drive. That was kind of a similar final thought you had as well.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which I don't fully disagree with. I do think the emotional impact of the scene is the most important thing. So I do agree.
Right. As I mentioned earlier, I think a little too much time was spent on Tony and Edward's story. I would have appreciated a little bit more time on Susan and seeing how she was reacting. I mean, a lot of the film was like reaction shots of her, at least like the first half, give or take. Would appreciate a little bit more looking into her world there.
I could see that.
In my opinion. But beyond that, solid movie overall. 7.5.
Nice. I'm going 9 out of 10.
My mother always told me if you massage your pussy with Palm cooking spray a month before the baby comes, you don't need vaginal rejuvenation.
A time travel movie done right.
Time travel.
If you haven't seen it yet, don't worry. There's far more details to catch that we did not. And you can't go wrong watching it for its beauty alone. Tom Ford, please make another film.
Yes, please. All right, join us next week for Casablanca, 1942.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
An American cafe owner encounters his former lover and her husband as they attempt to escape the Nazis in Morocco. Will he help them out, or is it a revenge on the ex situation? Watch and find out. Where can they find us, Shani Boy?
You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Ardent Cinema. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app, please give us a review and a 5-star rating. It really goes a long way towards helping build the podcast. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, smash that like button, click subscribe, and hit the little notify bell so you're made aware when new episodes drop every week. Thank you very much for listening, guys. We really appreciate it. And with that, we'll bid you adieu.
Farewell.
Long live the new flesh.
When are you going to change that shit?
Never.